Oh, we're live.
Good
Oh, and people are arriving. Hello.
morning.
Hello, Devin. Uh, I think, and I know I say this at every live now. I think there's so many lives that go on at any one time, especially around
Mm,
this time, that I think, there's not so many people watch lives now. I think they watch the replay. That's what I tend to do anyway. Just catch
Yeah.
up with it later, which is fine. But people are joining, which is good. We've got people to talk to. So I
Good.
will thank you for coming, everybody, by the way. Then I'll just introduce myself. So my name is Sue Reid, if you don't know me. My publication is Confidence Matters, and I talk about confidence. My aim is to help people be more confident and have more self-belief, particularly where they've been through some sort of trauma or transformation that's changed their confidence levels, so brought their confidence down. This year I've been working on themes as well. So so far this year, we've looked at living with intention, self-compassion, boundaries, March, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And then in April, I'm going to start talking about confident communication, because I think they all fit together. They all build a healthy way of living. So that's my aim. Anyway, that's enough about me. Do you want to introduce yourself, Deborah?
Sure. And I just wanted to add on, I think, being the very last weekend in March, talking about boundaries is the perfect segue into healthy communication. So I love how this is working out.
Thank you.
I am Dr. Deborah Vinall. I'm a mental health therapist and I'm a trauma specialist. I'm the author of 2 books, Gaslighting, a Step-by-Step Recovery Guide. It looks like this.
Yeah.
And the Trauma Recovery Workbook for teens. And on Substack, I write mental health musing. So here's the
Wow.
So and my Substack mental health musings focuses on themes of trauma, belonging, and just coping with the world we're in through a mental health lens.
Yeah. Then there's a lot of work in there at the moment, isn't there?
There's a lot. That's what I hear to my clients. Like, how are you doing? Well, the world's on fire. Like, yeah,
Exactly.
there's that. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was in a meeting with my circle, my paid tier last night, and I was just chatting, and then I heard something, and a low flying jet went past my window, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And they said, "What?" I said, "A jet's has gone past." I don't know if we're going to get bombed, but I think it was on its way somewhere. Somewhere, I don't know, but it's scary.
struggling.
Makes you
Yeah.
jump every time.
Mhm.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about war and things like that, bombing people. Boundaries, yes. So, what do you think of boundaries?
Well, I think of a boundary as the lines that help you figure out where you can have a healthy relationship with somebody that protects your own emotional and physical space and allows you to remain engaged. So, I had recently written an article, and I think that's why we connected over this topic
Yeah.
as you were also writing about it. And in that, I used the analogy that boundaries are like the dotted lines in the road. They're not like a road closed sign, but
Mm.
they allow you to know, like, if I'm here and you're there and the bicycles are there and the pedestrians are there, we can all use the space. We can all interact in a way that keeps us all safe and healthy and moving toward where we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I agree. That's exactly what boundaries are. It is a way of really setting out our own stall. Like, this is what I want my life to look like. This is how I want to be treated. This is how I'm going to respect you as well. And it kind of lays down some laws for life, really. But I
Mhm.
think often we don't get taught that. I mean, I was never taught anything like that from my parents or from teachers. Um, and so I think it's very difficult then to start setting boundaries later in life, especially when people are used to you being the people pleaser, the one that does everything. And then suddenly you say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And they're
Mhm.
like, what do you mean? And that can
Yeah.
cause a little bit of friction.
Yeah. And our own attachment styles can come into that too. If you have an anxious attachment with like a fear of abandonment, it can be really hard to set a boundary because you're maybe afraid that if I say, no, I'm not available then, or I can't do that for you, they might just leave you. That terror can come up. Or if you are a more avoidant person, you might use boundaries like walls to keep people out from, to protect your vulnerable heart to a place that becomes, I mean, that's kind of the purpose, is to protect your heart in a healthy way that keeps you engaged, though, not to shut people out. That's a bit of a myth about what boundaries are. So it's interesting to notice too how those childhood experience shape the way we relate to each other and how that shows up when it comes to boundary setting.
Yeah, definitely. And after my last article, the one that went out yesterday, somebody sent me a question. And it was in academic language. So this is my translation of it because I don't do academic. But basically, what he was saying is, what if boundaries actually create distance? So what he's saying is, you can cause friction, particularly in a relationship where you suddenly say to your partner, "I'm not doing that anymore," and that can drive you apart. But my thoughts on that is, if setting a boundary, if saying no to something, and you're doing it honestly and openly and with respect and love, if it's your partner, if that causes friction, then it wasn't the boundary, it was already the resentment underneath that's causing the friction. And it's bringing it to the surface. So that's the way I look at that. What do you think?
Absolutely. That's one of the big fears people have is, a boundary can push somebody away and cause friction. But like you said, if the relationship's healthy, then that won't be the case. And so ideally you want to partner with people that can respect you and say, oh, I see that there's a need there. It doesn't mean that sometimes we aren't hurt by people's boundaries because we're all very human. Like, it'd be nice to always be very intellectual at things like, oh, this is a healthy boundary they're making. And sometimes we do feel hurt. We're like, I was really looking forward to this idea that I had about how we were going to interact. And our own junk can get escalated and elevated into the situation. But yeah, ideally, we're able to. I mean, that's the other side of boundaries. One is setting them, and the other is learning how to interact in a world where other people healthfully have boundaries, and how do we respect them, and what happens if we don't.
Mm.
So if somebody is saying, I'm not available, for midnight phone calls,
Yeah.
not about you. That's about them loving themselves. And you want the people you love to take care of themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you first meet somebody, it's not very romantic to give them all these are the rules, these are my rules. So that would
Mhm.
be a very harsh boundary to set, wouldn't it? You need to kind of work it out as you go along.
Yeah, things unfold. You don't have to, like you said, give a list, like, here's how to interact with me. It's very rigid. But as your relationship unfolds, you start to express these things as situations come up. Like in a dating relationship, navigating sexual boundaries is something that has to be communicated, or you will end up in situations where you feel hurt or used or misunderstood, and things may unfold in a way you don't want. So that's one example, but you wouldn't like necessarily be on whatever your dating app is and be like, I mean, you might, but like the very first interaction with somebody, you might necessarily be like, and I will be comfortable with sexual interaction on day 5. Usually it unfolds more organically, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it's not a boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was exactly my problem when I was young, not so much teenager, but as I got a bit older, is that because I didn't have any boundaries, I basically like I was that girl that never says no, which was extremely difficult and extremely painful as well to get myself into situations where I backed myself into a corner. I didn't know how to get out of it. So you give in even though you don't want to, which was was horrible at the time. I look back at it now and think, oh my, why was I so I was naive, but, I wanna say, "Why was I so stupid?" But I wasn't stupid, I was naive.
And
Um,
just forward, you didn't know your power, or maybe have the respect for yourself above the need. Like the need was compelling, right? To be wanted or needed or whatever. So don't be so harsh on yourself. And
no, no,
you can see
we
how
have
boundaries are so protective, right? From the kind of trauma and regret and pain and feeling used and all the kinds of feelings that can come up in those scenarios. And boundaries aren't just for dating or sexuality, but it's a really
No,
clear example because we're talking so much and so importantly right now about all the sexual abuse going on, all the exploitation going on, and about being able to say no, and are people going to respect that? And so I think it's an example where we can almost universally agree that, yeah, boundaries are important and
Yeah.
that it percolates out into other relationship dynamics.
Yeah, yeah, and I hope it does encourage now, mothers to teach their teenage daughters and sons what boundaries mean, and how you respect each other, and go into that sort of sexual relationship at the right time. But like you say,
Mhm.
it comes into all aspects of life, so even our work life as well, how we're
Yeah.
treated at work, how we interact with other people at work.
Whether we're going to be working at 8 p.m. or returning emails, then, a lot
Yeah,
of, like you said, that people pleasing, don't want the boss to be mad. Can I set a boundary here? What's an emergency? When do I bend? When are my boundaries flexible and when are they not? Like, again, going back to my analogy, the lines in the road, there are times where, there's pylons or cones, depending what language you're using, that reroute us around the lane because of a certain need to. And so there's a standard, but sometimes we have to bend and flex. Um, but having a baseline boundary is what really keeps you healthy. So again, going back to, look at the example with the boss of like, I'm not going to be emailing you, after dinner, but maybe there's an important project that comes up and you bend that. Or my example about like, I'm not available for midnight phone calls. But if my sister calls and is like, my daughter was just in a car accident, I'm picking up that phone call.
yeah,
So I'm
exactly. Yeah,
bending flex in appropriate ways, but we also have the boundary so that it's important to me to get enough sleep, to be well rested, to take care of myself so I can show up in healthy ways the next day for my children, for my clients, for the people that I love.
yeah, yeah. But then so many people set their own boundaries and they start thinking, right, I'm happy with this. I'm happy with where this is going. But then somebody then says no to them, or, you try to contact somebody at midnight and they don't answer. And then you think, well,
Mhm.
why are they not answering? They've always answered before. And you forget that
Mhm.
other people have those rights too. If you can set your boundaries, they need to set theirs.
Well, I think one thing really important about boundary is that it's not something you imagine, it's something you have to communicate. So there's really three parts to the boundary. There's, identifying what your needs are, communicating it, and then the follow through, which would be, letting the call go to voicemail. And sometimes people just do the first one. They're like, oh, my boundary is, you can't put my picture on social media, which is an absolutely respectable boundary. Um, but they don't tell anybody that. And so if, they get their photo of hanging out is on social media and they're tagged in it and then suddenly they're like, well, the friendship's over. That's not fair. Because it's also a normal behavior for some people. Putting a photo on social media and tagging their friends is a very normal behavior that they're comfortable. So if your boundary isn't like, there's some things that are obvious, like rape is a boundary violation that doesn't need to be communicated, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Breaking into my house when I'm sleeping and taking my stuff as a boundary violation that doesn't need to be communicated.
No.
But most boundaries are very personal and negotiable. So they have to be identified, communicated, and then followed through with action. And
Yeah.
so in that case, if you told your friends, like, yeah, I'm not comfortable having my picture put on Instagram or Facebook or wherever, and then they do it anyways, then, what is your follow through? Like, I'm going to I don't want to be like friends on social media or whatever that's going to be so that you can reinforce your boundary and take it seriously.
Yeah, yeah, you have to have a follow through, because there's
Yeah.
no point in having a boundary and then it's meaningless if you don't follow through on it. I mean, you can give somebody a warning and say, look, I did say I didn't want my picture on
Hmm.
social media, so please can you remove that and not do it again? And then you just carry on and it's all's fine. But if they don't remove it or they put another one on, then you've got to
Hmm.
think, right, what do I do now? Is my friendship worth losing over a picture on social media? Or is this, just a sign of things to come, that they're never going to respect my needs? And then
Yeah.
you start thinking of all the other things they've done as well in the past.
Well, and that's the fundamental word you just used, respect, right? Because it's not about punishing somebody because you don't like something. It's about recognizing that if a person continuously, knowingly violates your boundaries, not like, oh, I forgot, you're the one person who doesn't like your picture. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna take it down. I won't do that again. That's that, being human. But if it's a lack of respect, I don't really care what your boundaries because I don't agree with it. So I'm going to do it my way. Then that tells you something deeper about the relationship and maybe how close it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. So what then if you are a because again, this is something that happened to me. So you're married, say you've been married for, I don't know, 5 years and everything's fine, but you have one partner who is more controlling. So say the man
Mhm.
is controlling the wife. She always does what he wants because she's the wife. She gives everything, she does everything. Whatever he says goes. They go on holiday where he wants to go to restaurants he wants to go to, etc., etc., etc. And then suddenly she starts to say no. And he feels threatened because he's thinking, hang on, my little wife is now trying to bully me, because this is a male reaction because I had it myself. Um, and that can really, and this, I guess this is where this guy was coming from who said about the friction, because this husband now is going to think, hang on a minute, I'm not having this. I'm going to have to push her back down again, which is
Mhm.
actually, again, what happened to me. So how
Mhm.
do we handle that then in those situations? Is it, a matter of saying, right, okay, well, if it happens again, I'm going to walk out? Or how can we have these normal conversations?
Yeah, that's actually a great example, and it highlights a lot of different things.
Mhm.
And some of it, I will say, I do talk about in my gaslighting book about unhealthy and healthy relationships.
Okay.
But the first thing that you're highlighting is that there is, and this is what you said to the person who asked the question, there is an unhealthy relationship dynamic, and what's happening is that you're creating it, you're revealing it. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
conflict can rise because you're revealing what's unhealthy and you're trying to establish something healthy. And so one of two things will happen. First of all, that one thing will happen. The abusive person or the domineering person is going to escalate in his efforts to put you back in their place. They're going to be
Mm.
more controlling, maybe louder, maybe whatever they're, depending how far they're willing to go, that will increase. Um, and this is actually true in a lot of relationships. This could be true like with your family members, your parents, your
Mm.
in-laws, whatever. And you set a boundary. People, when you change, you start shifting a dynamic and setting new boundaries and having more self-respect. People generally don't like it because there's a dynamic established. Like in your example, there's a 5-year marriage, or there's maybe a 50-year family relationship.
Mm.
And people like the status quo because it's working for them. And you start shifting that and rocking that boat, they're going to want to like steady that boat and get it back to the way it was. And so that might mean shouting you down or pushing you back and meeting a lot of resistance. But that's not the end of the story. So unless like this is where the story diverges, really, right? Like I said, there's two options. If you've got the really abusive person, it will escalate and get more and more dangerous. You need to get out. With general vanilla flavored controlling people, like uh, they'll escalate and eventually get used to it. So
Mm.
you really have to be able to be aware of what is the dynamic. Am I safe? Do I feel safe? Is this friction? And I'm so used to being a people pleaser that I'm uncomfortable with friction. So I feel tempted to go back to the way it was, or I feel like giving up and feel hopeless, like, oh, that didn't work. But very, very seldom will you set a new boundary with somebody with an old relationship and it'll just go swimmingly.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
generally you're needing to set a new boundaries because something wasn't working for you. So you have to be committed to being persistent and again having that third leg of the boundary, which is the what am I going to do when it's violated? Because you kind of have to expect that it may be. So if it's like, you're talking to mom and you set a boundary, like, we're not talking about my weight. That's my private journey or whatever, right? Um, I'm not going to discuss that with you. And she's on the phone and she's like, well, I just heard about this new diet. Have you heard? And you're like, mom, I told you I'm not talking about weight. And she's like, yeah, but let me just, okay, I'm going to end the phone call. We can try again next week. So you have a follow through. It can be respectful. It doesn't have to be a big explosion, a big fight,
Mm.
but you're just clear and confident and you follow through rather than just going, well, I guess here we go again. Gosh, I
Mm.
can do.
Yeah.
And you don't have to mean like, okay, I'm going to end the relationship. I'm never talking to mom again. It's reinforcing. It's kind of like reversing the dynamic when you were perhaps a child and you didn't like a certain behavior and something was withdrawn. It's not again like punishing, but it's reinforcing your boundary. I'm simply
Mm.
not engaging in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reinforcing is the important bit, because the moment you go back, then they know they've won, and they know if you've done it once, you'll do it again.
Yeah.
So they know that every time you say no, I just have to keep pushing and she'll give in,
Mm,
or he'll give in, because it works
absolutely.
both ways. Yeah. Yeah. So with my marriage, obviously it did come to an end, which was a good thing. And I think where my marriage now works is that we are both on the same level. We both have
Mm.
our own boundaries, and we both respect each other's boundaries. Um, we wouldn't, if we do step over the line, I think we just mention it to each other. We just say,
Yeah.
look, that, that upset me.
And I think that's
My
so
husband
important.
just pulling faces at me.
It's like, I don't do that.
Go
I
away.
never.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the reality, right? Is in any relationship, there will be times where we transgress a boundary, not necessarily intentionally, not maliciously, but there's no perfect dynamic. And so you have that, like, this is a generally healthy relationship where we actually respect each other's people. So we work through it and we repair. So boundaries, again, they're not walls, they're not relationship enders. Um, at least that's not the goal. And you don't have to move from I set a boundary, they violated to estrangement or divorce or whatever. There's room to say, like, that didn't hurt, that didn't work, or that hurt me, or I don't think you're understanding what I'm asking for here. Let's
Mhm.
work through this. And that's
Yeah.
really key.
Yeah. And I think that's important what you said, that hurt me, rather than saying you hurt me, you did this to
Mhm.
me, you shouldn't have done that, because that makes just makes the other person very defensive then. But if you say, look, when you did that, this is how I felt, then that's a lot softer, and they realize that, you're not accusing them, you're just saying how you feel. They're
Right.
likely to change then.
Yeah. And you don't, I can't think in the morning. It's the morning here in LA. um, you don't want to infuse, intention into what
Mm,
somebody said either.
mm,
Like, you might have some assumptions, but try to hold those loosely. So it's not like you did this because you were trying to do this and you were trying, just this is this is the boundary violation I experienced. It felt this way to me. And that doesn't work. So
mm.
how do we work through this? How do we fix that?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this
So if
again for what I
somebody's
mean?
if somebody's watching and they are, a people pleaser, and they know they're a people pleaser, and they think, I really, really want to stop doing this, but I have no idea how to set my boundaries at all.
Mm.
I guess the first thing to do would be to understand what is important to you. That's your first
Mhm.
step. How do you want to be treated?
Yeah. What do you need? What are your emotional needs, your physical needs? What's not working for you? And what would it look like to have those needs met? And maybe you just start with one if this is totally foreign territory to you. One
Yeah.
aspect of life, like maybe you're exhausted all the time, you're not getting enough sleep. Well, what maybe there's a boundary somehow that would help protect that. That might be an easier one than going into more emotional territory. Um, but figure out start and then do some journaling with it. You don't have to just like have a conversation right away, but starting with what are your needs? What's not working? What would it look like for those needs to be met or to feel better in those areas? Whether that's interpersonally with the kind of language used or time management or
Mm,
something like that. And then you can start by even writing out, practicing in the mirror if this is really scary, what it would be like to communicate that to the significant people that may be violating what's only an internal boundary, but not really a boundary because it hasn't been set yet. And then maybe, and if this is hard, maybe you practice it through with a friend or a therapist and then move into communicating it and just do one. Don't give them a litany. Here's a whole list of changing our relationship. That's going to feel like, it's not going to work very well. You know, um, and you may want to communicate what that follow through might be. Like in my example with the phone call, I'm not going to talk about my weight with you. And if we continue, then I'm going to end the phone call or I'm going to like go home or whatever the dynamic is.
mm.
You don't have to always communicate the what if right away because the boundary should be enough to be respected, unless it feels natural to do so. But know what it is yourself so that you're ready to follow through and not just make it a wish that you've expressed.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you say, start with something small. Like, I mean, starting with your mother is probably a good place to start, because she's more likely to be sympathetic.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
know not all mothers aren't always sympathetic, but you can say to her, look, mum, I don't, when you do this, you make me feel like I'm not good enough. Like, you're telling me I'm overweight, and that makes me feel really bad. I can see myself in the mirror. I know what I look like. I don't need to discuss it with you if you don't mind. And something like that, she's probably going to think, oh, well, I didn't realize that I was upsetting you. I was only trying to help, which she probably was. She wasn't, it's not like she's pointing to you in the street and shouting, hey, hey, fatty or something, because your mother, well, hopefully your mother wouldn't do that. But
There's a whole range of mothers, but, I think there's a truth in that, like, even passive aggressive mothers who are trying to be controlling, there usually is a piece underneath of wanting the best for you. They're just not really good at knowing how to express it or when to stop and just trust you as an adult to take care of your own stuff. So,
yeah, that's the other thing. They still see you as their child. And so
mhm,
you might be 40 years old now, but they're still going to treat you as your little girl or little boy and tell you
right.
where they think you've gone wrong or what they think you should do about it.
Mhm. And it goes back to ascribing intention, right? You may you may interpret something as they want to humiliate me, and really they're worried or whatever, or they're projecting their own um, body issues on you. This is if we're getting to a very specific example. Just try to hold loosely the ideas you have about why somebody's acting a certain way, but not that you have to ignore them because sometimes it is informative. Like if you're in an unsafe relationship, it may be good to really think deeply, but like what's really going on here?
Mm. Yeah. 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 I mean, well, a long time after we split up, when I took a long time to heal myself. And then when I look back and when I looked back and reflected on what had happened, I realized that my ex-husband had a very low self-esteem himself. So
Mhm.
if I showed any sign of confidence, he just had to push me back down again because he couldn't cope with not somebody seeing that he wasn't confident himself. That's the way I look at it now.
Mhm.
I mean, I have no contact with him now, and luckily we didn't have children. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay.
good luck to him wherever he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so what haven't we cleared? I think,
Maybe a point that would be worth discussing
yeah,
is how to respond when other people set boundaries with you, because like we
yeah,
kind of touched on how that can feel personal, it can feel rejecting, even if it's not really about intended that way. Um, and just a note about it's really important to respect others' boundaries just as you would want yours to be respected. That's actually much more protective of your relationship, even if it feels like more distance than you have had before or that you would like. Pushing past them and trying to force the dynamic that you want is not going to get you there anyways. You're really, if you're feeling like, oh, this is more distance than I wanted before, you're much more likely to end up closer again later if you can demonstrate that you love and respect them enough to say, okay, this is what you need. I will give that to you.
mm, yeah, 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 because you don't always have to. Um, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Then we don't always have to do something. But what I was going to ask you before what came into my mind was because you've written your book about teens, and I know that's about
Mm.
trauma. But with teenagers, how should teenagers go about setting their boundaries? Is it just exactly the same as adults, or do they need to look at things a different way? And should they do it on their own, or with their
Mm.
parents, or what's the best way?
Yeah, teens absolutely should have boundaries. And like you said, often are not taught that. They only receive them perhaps. Um, that as a teenager, you might receive a boundary about being home by a certain curfew, and it's important to respect that. But you also need boundaries, even with your parents, and in a really healthy relationship, like as a parent of a teen. Like I've told my own teenager, like you're gonna have to set boundaries with me because we're navigating new territory, and I want more of you, and I know you need less of me because
Yeah.
that's right. So you tell me what you need. You set those boundaries, and I will respect them, even if my heart breaks, because that's healthy and that's what's needed.
Yeah, yeah.
So even in throughout those teen years, because the adolescence is about individuation. It's about preparing to separate through doing so gradually, and so like a commonly understood boundary is a teenager often has not always, but often has their own bedroom, and so boundaries might be negotiated around, like knocking before entering, or like
Mhm.
an effective one is that you're not going to necessarily, unless there's some really serious delinquency or drug use concerns, you're not going to be digging through my purse or my backpack or my diary. right? So these are commonly understood boundaries. They may or may not need to be expressed. Um, Listening in on phone calls, things like that. Like privacy is a really important thing to a teenager as they're growing up, and so communicating what that might look like. Um, and so it becomes a really important relational dance where the parent might be setting a boundary of, hey, like, no phones at the dinner table. And the teenager might be setting a boundary about, like, hey, don't walk in on me. I might be changing. Oh, you're right. And blah, blah, blah. And that's a great model for life. If you can learn to both express and receive and respect boundaries with your parent, you're much more likely to have a successful relationship with a significant other later and roommates and all those other relationships. So giving that to your child and making it explicit about like what is the boundary and how do you set it, and you're welcome to set boundaries with me, although we might negotiate some of them because I am still the authority here. You can't just tell me. um yeah, like
Yeah,
mom, tell me when I'm
yeah.
taking your car is not a healthy boundary.
No, no, no. But I love that you said to your teen son, Tell me what you need from me, set a boundary for me," because that gives him a sense of autonomy that
Mm,
I can say what I want, and mum said she's going to respect me, obviously within her own boundaries as being a mum. But
mhm.
yeah, I think that's brilliant, and I think that does enable the teen, the child to see that what you're doing is it's a two-way street. Like you're not just giving them, they're not sitting there thinking, oh God, more rules. It's a two-way communication. You're saying, look, this is what I want from you. Now tell me what you want from me. And then we'll make sure that we respect each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I know that you need to go 'cause you've got another meeting shortly. So I am so grateful for you being here and talking to me again today. This is the second live we've done.
Yeah.
And it's really lovely talking to you.
That's lovely talking to you too.
And thank you, everybody that's been joined us today and everybody that watches the replay. It's always lovely to have you here. And yeah, so I will end there. So enjoy the rest of your day.
And you have a great evening.
Thank you. I will. Take care then. Bye. Bye.